some Phil Jackson type media motivation. Chris Finch apparently let his Timberwolves have it in the film session after game one.
Yeah, I mean, it was a rough film session. I told the guys it's been a long time since I've been this disappointed in your effort, your performance, your attitude, your application, your attention to detail. It just wasn't there. Western Conference Finals started. I'm not sure if they got the memo. They got it this afternoon. So,
what did you try to hammer home the most with that?
Our approach, we just played flat. Game plan was not on point for execution. Decision making on offense was not very good. Got beat by a lot of hustle plays, transition, offensive rebounds, stuff like that. It just can't happen.
It's interesting in a few different ways that he's talking about, hey, their effort was bad, their attitude was bad.
Yeah.
He said they came out flat. I thought exactly the opposite. Didn't you feel like in that first quarter it was like, man, Dallas is having to do some things to make sure this doesn't just sweep over them now.
Yeah, this could go from 9 to 15.
Yeah, and I felt like they came out with a lot of energy, and it was just they kind of tapered at the end. But
maybe the meds from the broken leg are getting to Finch.
Maybe that's pretty aggressive to go. I don't know if they got the memo that the conference finals started, but they know now.
And TNT and Shaq and Barkley had a major problem with the Wolves and Anthony Edwards talking about being tired, and Kyle Anderson was asked. He's Draymond Green's X Factor, the guy who looks the least like a basketball player that I've ever seen in my entire life. Kyle Anderson saying can't be a factor.
Yeah, that fatigue can't be a factor at this point of the season. I think after the film session we had and losing game one, we'll have a lot more energy and juice game two.
All right, so Tim McMahon, Mavs insider, Brian Windhorst, the great Brian Windhorst, and others were reacting to game one and previewing game two with some adjustments that we could see tonight and over the weekend.
Yeah, they were taking a look at just the different, takeaways out of game one and sort of the different ways. So it was McMahon takes the Mavericks, and then their other writer, their Timberwolves beat writer, Dave McMenamin, he took the Timberwolves side, and then Windhorst kind of gave the national approach.
Who's dating, what's her face on the NBA show? Malika Andrews.
Oh, I don't know.
I think Dave McMenamin, the Lakers reporter, is supposed to be dating her.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, McMenamin took the Timberwolves. Windhorst took kind of the national perspective. But biggest takeaway from game one from each perspective, McMahon said for the Mavericks, it was the fact that they're in uncharted territory. They finally win a game one under Jason Kidd. Said that Luka and Kyrie taking turns in the opener, kind of carrying the team, was a big deal for them and getting clutch defensive stops. McMenamin said for the Timberwolves, it was in what should be a long competitive series. The Timberwolves already showed that failing to execute on the little things can make the difference. Yeah. So he talked about the goaltending, the turnovers, those sorts of things. But what was interesting to me from Windhorst was he said the biggest headline to him coming out of this was that you could feel the big game experience of Doncic and Irving as compared to Edwards and Towns, and that became the defining storyline in game one. I thought we talked about that. We're trying to figure out if that was a factor or an issue, and I didn't feel like it was an experience thing down the stretch,
right?
But
that's so hard to quantify.
It is, but it's an interesting perspective where Windhorst has it there, and then we referenced earlier today over at the Ringer where Sirit Sohi said the experience factor came in. Anthony Edwards took what was given to him by the Mavericks. Luka Doncic took what he wanted from the Timberwolves defense.
My experience factor for game one was Kyrie in the first half. I think it's so easy and automatic for us to just say, what happened at the end? They missed shots and we made shots. Our experience won out. It's just a simple, lazy kind of opinion that you can have. Kyrie looking around and saying, these guys don't have West Finals experience. I'm going to take over early. That is the thought and approach of someone with experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, and I think that...
Of course it does. I said it.
I think when you see experience matter, like for instance, it didn't pop to me in Minnesota. Where it popped to me was last series. Chet Holmgren in big moments looked a little scared. Looked like he wasn't comfortable stepping up in those big moments.
Indiana at the end of game one, those two, Halliburton losing it and Siakam ball off the hands. Is that experience or was that lack of coordination in a moment? I don't know.
Yeah, it's like,
no
it's
one
like
knows.
the clutch gene question. Like, what is clutch? Is it the you raise your game or everybody else drops?
Yes.
Like, it's that kind of a question. So what is the adjustment that we can see in game 2? Tim McMahon says from the Mavericks perspective, they need to tweak their tag team center rotations to tilt the minutes heavily towards Derek Lively.
Ooh, so there's a lot of, and we have to have some tank apologies apparently, because there's a lot of Sam Presti OKC mentions with Derek Lively. CBS Sports says how the Mavs tanking 2 games helped them get to the 2024 Western Conference Finals, and I've heard others bring up for all the praise that Sam Presti gets for what he's built in OKC and what they have in assets. He helped the Mavs get Lively and took on a bad contract, and you could argue that Derek Lively is exactly what the Thunder were missing.
Yeah, I mean, he was somebody who, when you talk about young players not being shaken by the moment, there were some young players in OKC that looked too big for him, and Lively didn't look that way at all. Lively looked more comfortable than some veterans on the court in that second round. But what's
also, let me point this out, it's also easy to look more comfortable when you have Derek Lively's role. When you don't have the ball in your hands as an offensive player and your job is to rebound and block shots and defend, it's a lot easier for us to say you're more comfortable. The only way for you to really get exposed with nerves is on the free throw line when they're not running any offense through you.
Which he did. He did make some big free throws down the stretch.
Yeah.
And I think what you see is he's not afraid, though, to take the ball in those moments. He's not afraid to challenge shots. Like, he's not playing, you know how we've talked before about Luka, sometimes when he gets the fouls up there, he's a little more timid on defense and like, oh, can't get the foul, and steps back. Like, Derek Lively is just, he's going, I'm playing basketball and I'm not thinking about it. We're just going to, play our game the same sort of way. That's that steady level there. McMahon says changing the starting lineup would be too drastic at this point, so not flipping Lively into the starting lineup. But he says it's impossible to ignore the plus-minus with Lively on the floor versus Gafford. So for the postseason, how big a discrepancy do you think there is between Gafford and Lively in terms of the plus-minus?
I know that Lively's plus-minus is through the roof awesome.
It's 172 points. Gafford is minus 62.
Oh.
Derek Lively, they are plus 106 with him on the floor. And he says that's just too impossible for the Mavericks to ignore. McManaman for the T-Wolves says the Wolves...
Poor Gafford got that Kyrie ball to the face at the beginning, too.
And he struggled a lot in the Clippers series. He was getting worked by Zubats at first.
Yes.
And so that was there's an example of a guy who early on it felt like the playoffs were a little big for him. And it felt like he was stepping down his game a little bit. McMenamin for the Wolves says the Wolves slowed down in the second half, scoring just 43 points compared to the 62 in the first 2 quarters. After the defeat, Towns and Edwards lamented Minnesota's meager 12 fast break points. Edwards also got on himself for letting Irving beat him down the court for a layup after a made basket by the Wolves. Minnesota sounds ready to pick up the pace in game 2. So better pace on offense, trying to play with more intensity. Some of the stuff Dave Finch just mentioned there about hustle. For Windhorst, he said the Mavs have announced their game plan.
Chris Finch,
yes. The Mavs have announced their game plan. They will pack the paint and dare Minnesota to beat them with the outside shot. Dallas wants to put multiple bodies between Edwards, Towns, and the rim. Edwards had to work extremely hard to create space for himself throughout game 1, and Towns had no space when he was inside. In the first half, the Wolves went 11 of 25 on 3. In the second half, 7 of 24. Edwards and Towns were combined 12 of 36 from the field. That is a winning formula. What was interesting, ESPN threw the stat up there just a few minutes ago on shots that ESPN Stats and Info graded as open looks for Anthony Edwards in game 1. He was 0 for 6. That, again, is one of the things where you ask, okay, is that the moment getting to you a little bit? Or
fatigue.
Yeah, fatigue. I mean, heavy
Or not
legs.
his specialty. He's not this knockdown, dead-eye shooter. He's shooting 10 and 12 3-point attempts, and he was like 6 during the regular season. Again, great for the Mavs, not his game.
Yeah. Now, the X factor for each guy here to close out the series, Tim McMahon says it's P.J. Washington, the Mavs surprise star of the second round, struggled from 3-point for most of the opener, hit the clutch 3 late in game 1. He did that in game 6 against the Thunder, too, where he couldn't shoot at all, and he made 2 big ones late. So he says that's going to be a big one right there is P.J. Washington. McMenamin says it's Jaden McDaniels. He said it's hard to ask any more of him than what you got out of game 1, especially through the first 3 quarters. Defensively, Doncic shot just 4 for 12 with McDaniels as the primary defender. Offensively, McDaniel scored 21 points on 8 of 12 shooting. And then Windhorst says the X factor is Mike Conley. He says any lingering impacts following his Achilles tendon injury are hard to predict, but the Wolves badly needed offensive organization and his calming influence down the stretch. Conley's presence wasn't felt in crunch time of game one, a crucial pivot point for the Wolves moving forward. He had a big turnover. I think he had 2 turnovers late. And Luka, that was obviously the one where he had defense on him and he wasn't able to get through.
4 keys that I have for tonight. We know that the tidal wave of emotion is coming in Minnesota, Madhouse, but their head coach has called him out. We know that a first 5-minute, maybe first 10-minute tidal wave of emotion is coming. Withstand that. Number 2, I'm a little bit worried about foul trouble for one of the Mavericks with Anthony Edwards going to the paint. If I'm Finch, I'm telling him, unless you are wide-ass open, you're going to the bucket. Maybe we get an offensive foul or 2 from over-aggression. Mavs threes early on. They made 6 compared to Minnesota's 18. Will they show themselves as a 3-point threat early? And then early Kai. Will Kyrie Irving be that aggressive again? My 4 questions and keys for this evening.